Hi, everybody, and welcome to this Friday, April 24th edition of the Bear Facts Friday. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to listen. Once again, just to rehash three things that Mark, Lisa, and I are doing. I'm giving you kind of the big picture takeaway of the week. Mark's going to give you some perspective, how to boil that down even further, and Lisa to give you some words of wisdom. So first, my perspective, my big picture takeaway is two things from this week. First is round 2 of the Payroll Protection Program, otherwise known as Triple P or PPP. All I can say is stay on top of your banker if this is something that you think you'll need. This is a loan from the government or from your bank for 2.5 months of payroll, of which will be forgiven if it's used for the appropriate measures. There was a lot of trouble with receiving the money in round 1. In round 2, they've issued additional money. I think Trump just signed it today as we're recording this. So just make sure, stay on top of your banker. And if you don't have a banker, call us. I'll be happy to refer you to get you in front of someone. But I think also a lesson to take away from this in the future is have a banker. Have a relationship with a banker, whether it be a big bank or a small bank. We prefer ones that are more local, give you more personalized service, but create some relationship, because it's times like this when you need one, they can really help. So that's one takeaway, big news of the week. The second is, starting to open things back up come Friday. That's why I got Rolling Stones, essentially another name for bowling. So come to Friday, you can go out there, you can bowl, go to a movie theater, and do hair salon, get a haircut. I know a lot of us need that, as you can probably tell from myself. And I know a lot of the rest of the country is making fun of us and thinking that it's too early or whatnot. Hopefully it all works out. We're all healthy, and it does really feel that it's not good. Things aren't great now, but hopefully the worst is behind us and we are starting to move in the right direction. And maybe the beginning of opening things back up will start the process of getting back to normal. Just knock on wood that everybody can stay healthy, and it turns out to be a wise move. Mark?
Yeah, Kenny, I love that. I think hopefully this leads to getting back to some sense of normalcy, but as we've all been hearing, just continue to stay safe. Whatever it is that you're comfortable with, by all means, that's what you should be doing. And then for perspective this week, I really want to pose a question to you out there is do you know what you're invested in? And what I mean by that is that you could be invested in an infinite number of different ways, whether it's individual stocks or maybe bonds or precious metals. Any number of things exist out there. Do you know what you're invested in? So take, for example, on the left side of the screen, just a couple of the common indexes that you may have heard of. We've got the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest companies in the United States. The Dow is another common index that some people refer to as the market. That's actually only 30 of the larger blue chip companies. NASDAQ, which is heavily tech driven. The Russell 2000, which is actually more of the small cap companies. And then there's other indexes abroad for international developed and emerging markets. But for my example today, I want you to take a look at this chart right here. And it depicts the S&P 500. And I know it's a busy slide with a lot of different names on it. So don't worry about that. And hold on one second, we'll get it pulled up. There we go. Don't worry about all of the names on the left. In fact, it's impossible to read them all. Why is that? Because on the left side, there's 450 different names that make up half of this chart. And on the right side, there's 5 names that make up the other half of the chart. I want to put this in perspective for you that the S&P 500, with this great source from Michael Batnick here, the S&P 500 is primarily driven by 5 companies: Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet or Google, and Facebook. So if you're thinking of quote unquote the market, and you are referring to the S&P 500 in your example, you may be talking about predominantly 5 companies out of 500. If you're talking about the market and you're talking about the Dow, that's just 30 companies. So it's important to understand that not only maybe when you're having conversations, but also when you're digging deeper within your own investments and within your own portfolio. So I challenge you to really understand what your investments are made up of below the surface. Dig back 1 or 2 layers to get a better understanding. That's my perspective of the week. And now I'll hand it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, everybody. Well, life is certainly funny, isn't it? This time last week, we were talking about living in the uncertain times of how, like the virus, stress and anxiety of these times can be infectious. And just as we are accepting our current state of affairs and getting comfortable with our shelter-in-place routine, life throws us another curveball, as Kenny talked about with the release of some of the shelter-in-place restrictions here in Georgia. And with this new change comes new uncertainty, and that uncertainty can heighten the anxiety and stress that we all feel, setting off emotional triggers that some of us weren't even aware that we had. Emotional triggers, it's an interesting phrase, and yet I've heard it more times than I can count in the last 6 weeks. Now, it's just 2 simple words that when you take them independently, all of us can easily define them pretty accurately. However, when you put them together, the meaning becomes a little more nebulous, at least for me. The funny thing is, I've used them in conversations with friends and colleagues, and now I'm not sure, when I stop to think about it, that I even know what they mean. So I took the opportunity to do a little research and did what most of us do when we need to answer a question. I went to the expert, Google, and what I found was, in general, that an emotional triggers are circumstances and situations that cause us to respond more emotionally than rationally, and out of proportion to what would normally be expected in that given situation or circumstance. Now, the past 6 weeks have presented all of us with these kinds of situations that could have very easily triggered emotional reactions. Excuse me. And I ask you to think back, if you would, to just before that shelter-in-place order was made. And as we watch the coronavirus creep across Europe and come in and pop its ugly head up in the United States, did the news of that potential pandemic abnormally heighten your fear? Did the uncertainty and unpredictability of the stock market make you literally tense or feel extraordinarily vulnerable? Now, was your reaction to either one of these circumstances to rush out and buy more household goods and cleaning supplies than you would ordinarily use in a year? Or were you really, really tempted to convert all of your stock positions to cash? Now, whether or not you did either one of those is really not relevant at the moment for my point. What I'm referring to is that overwhelming feeling that you may have had, that emotional reaction that made you want to act in a way that you ordinarily would not have. That's the emotional trigger. So now that we understand kind of what an emotional trigger is, the question becomes, how do we manage these emotional triggers appropriately, reasonably, rationally, and avoid taking unnecessary risks? There are multitudes of elaborate techniques that have been developed by hordes of experts on the subject, of which I am certainly not. But personally, I like to keep it simple, and I lean towards this 4-step approach. The first step is to pause. Recognize that you're feeling an emotional response to some circumstance or situation. Acknowledge it, name it. Anger, frustration, vulnerability, jubilation, something like that. And then release it. Actually exhale that overwhelming emotional impulse. Use some healthy tools that you already have and that you're comfortable with, and many that you enjoy, such as exercise, meditation, conversation with a trusted friend or an advisor. The important thing is to remember that emotions are not permanent. That overwhelming sensation of it will pass. Next, you would obtain some perspective. by thinking about whatever the situation is but think of it in the terms of a big picture. And a tool that I've personally used in the past when I've been in difficult situations or have been faced with a complicated decision is a mind map. Another that a lot of people use is a pro-con list. Anything that you might have or have used is fine, whatever works for you. Finally, substitute counterproductive thoughts with productive ones. If you're feeling angry, think about some things that you're grateful for. If you're feeling, instead of feeling fearful, think about things that are actions that you could take that are more productive and positive. The point is that it's at the height of the emotional trigger that we act impulsively, emotionally, and that we take risks that ordinarily we would not take, that are neither necessary or beneficial. It's important not to let these situations cloud our judgment. Hopefully you found a nugget in this approach that will be beneficial for you or for someone else in your life. If you follow these steps, we will all become pros at managing our emotional triggers. So Mark, I ask you, are you a pro?
I can speak for Mark in that he is without a doubt a pro. So yeah, I think Lisa, those are just such wise words. I mean, the truth is, if we can all take a step back and just put ourselves look at ourselves from the outside looking in. It's often very tough to do. We recognize things, things that are going on around us or that are happening to us, and can be better equipped to dealing with that. And just recognizing your own flaws or recognizing your own triggers is kind of the first step of that. So, I mean, thanks so much. I want to thank everybody again for listening. Feel free to reach out to us anytime you have any questions, anything going on, anything you think that we can help you with. Until next week, y'all have a wonderful weekend, and also make sure to tune in to our webinar coming up as well. Bye.
All right.